If you're a guest, thank you for being here this morning. We're just honored. You could be anywhere, and the fact that you chose to be here is a big deal. And so we just consider that a tremendous honor. To thrive, let me start by asking, who wants their life to thrive? I mean, that's not a bad deal, right? I mean, thriving's not I can think of a whole lot worse things than thriving in life and thriving at life. To thrive means to grow vigorously. It means to flourish. It means to progress despite circumstances. To thrive means to prosper. We learned the first week of the series is that thriving is a daily mindset. It's a daily choice. It's a daily choice of what I choose to entertain between my ears and what I give resonance to and what do I give voice to in my thinking. Last week we learned that thriving is a partnership. It's a partnership with God. And the number one tool that God has given us to partner with Him in and through is giving. Is giving. Our lives, you will always live life to the level of your giving. And when we're talking about giving, we're not just talking about money. It's part of that, but we're talking about giving in every aspect, in every way of life. Because giving, guys, listen, it's not just the act of giving. It's not just the act of giving, but it's about the attitude of our heart. It's giving the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reasons. It's about giving the right thing at the right time, the right way for the right reasons. Guys, the key to thriving is giving. And like I just mentioned, giving takes many forms. Sometimes we need to give up. Right? And when I say give up, I don't mean quit. I don't mean just throw your hands up and just, I'm done with life. I'm throwing in the towel. I'm giving into despair. That's not what I mean. But I'm talking about giving up self-righteousness, giving up pride. I'm talking about living a surrendered life where we just say, you know what, God, I'm done. I'm done trying to do this my way in my own strength. Rather, I give up to you. We can always give over. When we give over, we're taking those dynamics of our lives that we're continually wrestling with, and we're saying, you know what, God, I'm giving them to you. I'm putting them in your hands. You know what, it's killing me. I cannot carry this. There is more on my life than I can handle, so I'm giving it to you. Amen? I'm giving over. I'm putting it in your hands. Sometimes we give too. That's where we demonstrate generosity. That's where we step in and we help other people. This morning at the end of service, the ushers will be at the back with the offering baskets again because we as a church family, there's 3 families who we really want to help for Christmas. And so we want to give everybody an opportunity. If everybody does something, man, we can do some great things for these families. Why? That's giving too. That's helping to meet the needs of other people. Sometimes we have to give in. We give in through obedience. We give in when we apply God's principles and His patterns and His ways to our lives. Listen, guys, a life of obedience is the most proactive form of living. Maybe you're here today saying, man, how can I live more proactively? Obey God. Obeying Him is the most proactive thing that you can do in life. And because what that does is when we give in to Him, it frees us from a self-centered survival mindset. It sets us free. We can give wisely. Last week we talked about the law of reciprocity, right? Give, and it shall be given to you, right? So we give wisely. We just don't give randomly. We give with some expectation. We give wisely. Last week we also learned about the law of self-determination. The same manner in which you give it, it'll be given back. So you have some say in your harvest. The truth is, you determine your harvest. You determine what comes back. Because in the same manner and way in which you give it, it's the same way it'll be returned into your life. And that's an awesome, awesome thing. Guys, and lastly, a way that we give, and what we're going to talk about a lot this morning, we mentioned it last week, but we're going to talk about the need to forgive. Forgive. This is where we release resentment and bitterness. This is where you release the ongoing anger, the internalized pain. This is where there's a release of grace toward people who've simply just done you wrong. Guys, all forms of giving are rooted in God's love. Do we understand that? Matter of fact, the greatest expression of God's love is the fact that He gives. How many of us realize love gives? And that's important. Giving is a part of God's nature. It's in His nature to give. It's in His nature to forgive. And listen, guys, because of that, His love mandates that if you're a part of His family, then giving and forgiving is not an option. Just like the people in your family resemble you, just like your kids have some of your qualities and some of your characteristics and some of your traits, because it's in God's nature to give and because it's in His nature to forgive, then guess what? He expects us to operate in His nature that has come to live on the inside of us when we said yes to Jesus. It's not in your old nature to give. It's not in who you were before Jesus to forgive. But because now you're in the family, guess what? He expects it. It's an expectation. Why? Because it's in your nature. He expects His family to do the same. It's powerful. And in Matthew chapter 18, we see Jesus giving us a parable. This won't be a new parable for some of you. For others of you, it may be. But this morning, we're going to look at it in a fresh way. And we're going to look at this parable and learn the principles of it. In Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 23, this is what Jesus said. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like. Now, I'm going to stop right there for just a minute. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like. Listen, guys, so many of Jesus, He's starting this parable the same way that He started most of His parables. The kingdom of heaven is like a sower who went out to sow. The kingdom of heaven is like a lady who lost a coin. The kingdom of heaven is like someone who bought a field. And we have to understand the power of what Jesus is saying here. Because so many times we say the kingdom of heaven is like, and then we think the real meat is in the parable. But there is meat in the parable, but the parable is only as strong as the fact that He's illustrating heaven. And He's illustrating the kingdom. When He says the kingdom of heaven is like, He's not giving us a churchy idea. We need to understand that. He's not just giving us a church principle. He's telling us, I want you to know how God rules and how He operates. When He says the kingdom of heaven is like, He's wanting you to know how God thinks. He's wanting you to know how God operates. He's wanting you to know how God orders things. He wants you to know how God has made life to function. And He's wanting us to know that when we align ourselves with His order, that life begins to work effectively. And when life's working effectively, that's when you thrive. So the kingdom of heaven, listen, the Bible says that the kingdom is righteousness, peace, and joy. So every time Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven is like, He's saying you need to grasp these principles. You need to apply them to your life, because when you do, you'll find peace. When you do, you'll find joy. Why? Because when you do, you'll find the kingdom and everything that the kingdom has for you. So in this kingdom parable, and in every kingdom parable, Jesus is trying to set us straight on some things. He's trying to help us understand that a kingdom life is a thriving life. And a thriving life is a life that works. And so let's go on and see what He says. The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. One writer said that this amount in contemporary monetary is probably about $100 million. That's a little bit of money. That's just a little bit. 10,000 talents. But he was not able to pay. His master commanded that he be sold with his wife and his children and all that he had, and that payment be made. The servant therefore, listen to this, fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience. Just give me some time. Have patience with me, and I'll pay you all. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion released him, and he forgave the debt. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. Some writers have said that's about $40. About $40. And he laid his hands on him and he took him by the throat. You see the picture? Getting violent with the guy. Saying, "Pay me what you owe me." So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, "Have patience with me. Just give me some time, and I'll pay you all." And he would not, but went and threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were very grieved. And they came and told their master all that had been done. Then this master, after he had called him, said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?" And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due him. So my heavenly Father also will do to each of you from his heart, shall do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses or his sins or his offenses. Guys, there's really four things that Jesus is driving home in this parable. And one thing he's driving home is obviously the need to forgive others. I think that's pretty obvious. He's also driving home our need to give up selfish interest. He's also driving home that we need to learn to give in to God's greater wisdom. But one of the most important things that he's driving home for us, that he wants us to see and grasp, is the first, it's the reason, is that we must know the right reason to give and to forgive. The most important thing that he's driving home in this parable is that we must know the right reason to give and forgive. Because remember, giving and thriving through giving is all about giving the right thing at the right time, the right way, for the right reason. And so Jesus is really trying to drive this home to us. Look at the confrontation in verses 32 through 33. The master has found out what the first servant did. He goes to him and says, he calls him a wicked servant. "I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" Guys, we have to understand that forgotten grace breeds unforgiving living. Forgotten grace. How did this first servant find him in this place? How did he find himself? And we'll talk about the penalty that he received in just a little bit. How did he find himself in such a bad situation? It happened because he forgot the grace that he had received. He had forgotten everything the master had done for him. He had forgotten about that it was once him falling on his knees saying, "Give me some time, have mercy." And then the master says, "You know what? It's all taken care of." He forgot the grace that he had received. And what did that lead to? Forgotten grace led to an unforgiving life. Someone who couldn't forgive other people. So what's Jesus saying to us? He's saying, listen, God's love, mercy, and grace that you've experienced is the starting place for you to learn to forgive and give. He's saying, listen, it doesn't matter what you're giving. Whether you're giving mercy or money. It doesn't matter if you're giving forgiveness or finances. The reality is this: the starting place for all giving in your life is the grace that the Father's poured out in you. Anything you give is rooted. His grace at work in your life is the source. It's the foundation of every form of giving that you and I will ever enter into. And Jesus is saying you can't forget the foundation because it's fundamental to your life. Because as soon as you forget the foundation, everything gets cattywampus, everything comes out of alignment, life gets skewed, and you forget. And then you start making poor choices. We've got to understand the context of this parable. If we back up to verse 21, listen to verse 21. Peter came to Jesus and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? And then Peter said, up to 7 times? Now, you and I read that and we think, man, Peter, you're such a knucklehead, man. Right? We read that and think, how did this guy walk with Jesus and just not get it? I mean, let's be honest. We really look at Peter like, dude, you are just, we all just think, man, if I'd have been one of the 12, I'd have just slapped Peter. I mean, there's a few times, you would have thought about just knocking Peter out because he was just a bonehead. Always doing boneheaded stuff, saying dumb stuff, wanting to do just, big mouth, little follow through, more bark, less bite, no substance, just, Peter, shut up. And so we read this, Jesus, how many times you would forgive somebody? 7 times, and we think, come on, man. But the reality is this, is Peter, culturally, his suggestion to forgive 7 times was radical. See, we read that and think Peter's being stupid. The reality is, in that culture, Peter offering to forgive someone 7 times was actually really generous. Because see what the rabbis in that day taught. What they taught was, and they based this on some scripture that they twisted out of Amos, they taught that God had a 3 strikes and you're out policy. That's what they really believed. They thought that God would forgive and have mercy up to through 3 offenses, but once that 4th time, judgment. And that was the culture, and that was the context that Peter was speaking in. So for Peter to say, Jesus, should we forgive up to 7 times? I mean, he's doubled it plus 1. I mean, what Peter was saying was radical for those people based on their culture. I mean, it was crazy what he was saying. But then look how Jesus responded. Jesus said, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Now, this is what Jesus wasn't saying. Jesus wasn't saying keep a scorecard. And once you get to forgive up through 490, but at 491, it's over. That's not what Jesus was saying. Jesus basically was saying it's infinite. It's infinite. You can't put a number on it. Peter stretched them culturally to think 7, and Jesus just took it and blew it. I mean, just boom, blew it out the water. You forgive people, Jesus is saying, and just never stop forgiving. It's limitless, is what Jesus is trying to tell these guys. So then he goes ahead and tells this parable that we've already read. Why? Because he wants it to be a mirror. He wanted it to be a mirror for the people who were standing there that day, that they could look into this parable and see themselves. And guess what? His intent and the intent of the Holy Spirit and the intent of the Father was for it to be a mirror for you and I today. So that as we stand here and read it together and talk about it, that again it becomes a mirror for all of us. That we see ourselves in this parable. Because listen, guys, we're all God's created people. Every person in this room, you've been chosen by God. Thank you, all 3 of you. Every person in this room, you've been chosen. God's chosen you. He's picked you out. He says, I want you. And listen, we're all accountable to Him. We all had a debt to Him that we couldn't repay. Come on, somebody. All of us, outside of His grace, we were hopeless and helpless with no future. Think about the first servant in the story. He was hopeless. Man, he had no future. What was about to happen to him was this, is that he was going to be sold into slavery. His wife, his kids, his family were going to be torn apart. And listen, let me just say this as a caveat. Jesus using that as an illustration, he's just trying to teach us about consequences. He's not endorsing that. Okay? We need to understand that. That's not his endorsement of that. That's not how God operates. But there are consequences. And so he's trying to teach us the power of consequence. So here this guy is, he's hopeless. Why? Because he has no future. His life's about to be destroyed. His family's about to be destroyed. And he's about to lose it all. Not only is he hopeless, but he's helpless. There is nobody else for him to appeal to get his account settled. He's helpless. It was absolutely unpayable. And he did exactly what you and I do, didn't he? What did he do? He said, just give me some time, God, and I can fix it. We do that, don't we? Oh, God, I owe you a debt, and somehow we think that just in our humanity we can repay that. God, just give me some time. Lord, I can work on it. I can fix myself. I can fix this situation. I can fix my thoughts. I can fix this addiction. I can fix this chronic anger. God, I can fix this animosity in my home. God, I can fix a broken marriage. God, I can fix it. If you just give me time, I can fix it all. Guess what? You can't fix it all. Because if you could have fixed it all, you wouldn't have been in this mess to start with. You're not that good. You're not that talented. You're not that smart. You're not that powerful. The reality is this: we can't fix it. But here's this servant saying, God, Master, I can fix it. Just give me some time. This guy was just an average middle-class guy. He wasn't in the top 1%, and he owed $100 million. Think about before you knew Jesus. Think about how you and I have violated the heart of God and the debt that we owed him. There was no way. Guys, before Jesus, we were all hopeless. We were all helpless. But I'm so grateful that our cry for mercy, his compassion, was extended towards us. Just like the guy in the story. Master, give me time. Please. And what did the master do? I forgive all of your debt. It's done. Go your way. Go be free. Go thrive in life because the debt's been dealt with. It's powerful. Just like the guy in the story, his forgiveness is total and unconditional. Isn't that powerful? And because we've been forgiven completely, he's expecting us to give that to other people completely. The parable is teaching us that we've got to forgive completely and unconditionally because of his grace that has become the source of our life. You remember where you were? Think about it. Remember where you were. How broken your life was. How lost and undone. I was sitting in the back room while Kevin was up receiving the offering. I could hear a little bit, and I heard him just talking about a praying grandmama. You know, and I heard him choke up and tear up, thinking about where he was before Jesus. Where were you before Jesus? Or have you been saved so long you can't even remember? Guys, we've got to remember. Why? Because that is got to be the backdrop. That's got to be the motivation for our giving and our forgiving. Listen to this. Don't miss. This is the challenge for us. To whatever degree we forget and fail to see the totality of our helplessness and of our hopelessness, listen, we will be proportionally at risk to fail through unforgiveness because of forgetfulness. To whatever degree we forget, to whatever degree it is that you forget how helpless and hopeless you were, is to the same degree that you run the risk of being an unforgiving person simply because you forgot. Do I need to say it again? To whatever degree we forget His grace, we forget how screwed up our lives were. We forget how bound up we were. We forget how broken we were. We forget just how unacceptable we were. To whatever degree we forget that, proportionally we run the risk of living an unforgiving life. When I forget who I was and where I was before Him, self-righteousness kicks in. Then it's all about my right to be right. And I fail to see myself, listen, and I fail to see myself in the need and the failings of others. When I forget His grace, when I forget everything He's done for me, it's impossible for me to then see myself in someone else's bad decision, to see myself in somebody. Then at that point, I no longer can understand. Why? Because I've forgotten where I was. Because I've become a Pharisee. Because I've become so self-righteous within myself. When I look at other people and I see poor choices, I judge. When I see other people doing dumb stuff, I condemn. When somebody's a knucklehead and does me wrong, I don't release forgiveness. Why? Because I no longer can see myself like I used to be. And I'm like the guy in the parable. Not physically, but in a very real way. I might as well just be grabbing them by the throat. I might as well just be grabbing them by the throat and putting them in the wall and saying, "You owe me. You owe me." And guys, the spirit of unforgiveness is evident in many different ways. It's evident in this list I'm about to give is so common. I think we're all about to get hit, so just brace yourself. Okay? Just brace yourself. Look at your neighbor and say, "He's talking to you." Now look at yourself and say, "You're talking to me." Listen, a spirit of unforgiveness is evident when we criticize a coworker. It's evident when we judgmentally condemn people for poor choices. It's evident when we're vindictive. It's evident when we think things like, "I want them to hurt just like we've hurt." It's evident when we speak unkindly about someone. It's evident when we reject someone because their social standing isn't quite what ours is. It's evident when we tolerate attitudes of racism and prejudice. It's evident when we carry hatred and anger. It's evident when we think we're somehow superior to other people, even spiritually, or our church is better, or our theology is better, or our doctrine's better. Every one of those blasted me at some place in my life. And you know what? If we're all honest, it hit each one of us too. Every falling out between people, listen, don't miss this. Every falling out between people is because someone forgot to give, or someone failed to forgive, or someone failed to give understanding to people's differences. $40. $40, this guy, for $40, this guy gets grabbed by the throat, put into the wall, and turned over to the jailer. Just do with him whatever you want to do. Well, first of all, he'll never pay you the $40 back from jail. But he didn't care because he was right. He was right. Because at that point, the only thing that mattered to him was his rightness. And proving that he was right. And in verse 29, the second servant falls at his knees and he asks of the first servant the very same thing that he asked of the master. He said, hey, please be patient with me. I'll pay you everything you owe me. And you think while the guy's on his knees in front of him with tears in his eyes running down his face, that the first servant would wake up and that somehow he would remember his own cry for mercy. But he didn't. He didn't. Throw him into prison. My goodness, how quickly we forget the greatness of grace that looked beyond our faults, saw our need, and forgave us. Think about it. If across this back wall that serves as a backdrop for us this morning, imagine if that whole back wall laid there was the ways that we failed God. Think about it. And then in front of that, we were to lay the way others have failed us. Guys, I'll be honest with you. The way others have failed me would pale in comparison to the ways I've failed him. The way others have failed me, have people failed us? Yes, absolutely. But it would be minuscule compared to the ways I've failed him. The forgiven are called to be the forgiving. To the same degree that we've been unconditionally and graciously forgiven. But see, there's a problem in this story. There's a problem in this parable. The problem is this, is when many times we read this parable and we think, well, the master has heard what has happened. He's now come to confront the unforgiving servant. And we think somehow I guess we just, by our own reasoning, we think that because the master has come and he's confronted servant number one, that the master then went and got servant number two out of jail. We think that. We just somehow in our minds, we just assume that's what happens. But the text doesn't say that. Think about business dealings today. If you have two people in a business dealing and there's debt between the two of them, a third party can step in and pay off the debt, but they can't release it or dismiss it. It still has to be dismissed by the one who was indebted to. So what are we learning in this parable? We're learning, don't miss this, this is important. First of all, this is a powerful picture for us. We're learning that this issue was between the two servants and that the master had no authority over their interpersonal business matter. Think about that. The master had no authority over their interpersonal issue. That's why he didn't go and get the second guy out of jail. Because he's not the one who put him in jail. And he didn't have the authority to get him out of jail. The person who had authority to get him out of jail was servant number one who put him there. So this is a powerful picture of our relationships. Listen, And all of us in this room this morning who have a relationship with God, we must give attention to our relationships with one another. We can't be forgiven and unforgiving. Listen, you may be here today and be confident in your relationship with God, but you may still be carrying a debt of other people. The second thing is this, is God can't do and doesn't do anything about inner believer issues and stresses. Why? Because He won't violate your will. Can I debunk some things that we say and think? See, we have interpersonal issues, and we think things like, well, I'm just believing God's going to take care of it. It'll never get taken care of because He won't. It's not His issue, it's your issue. If I have an issue with Elvin, guess what? God doesn't step in and solve the issue. He expects us to solve the issue. It's not His responsibility to solve it. It's our responsibility to solve it. We say other churchy religious things, and we sound like Pharisees. We say, well, I've just put it in His hands. Why? You may have tried to put it in His hands, but He didn't pick it up. It ain't in His hands. You may have been trying to put it there, and He's saying, don't hand that to me. It ain't my issue. That's your issue. Yes, I'm God. Yes, I have all authority, but I've also given you a will. You do it. That's your stuff. I ain't taking that. We say things like, oh, it's just in His timing. No, it's not. It's in your timing. It's in your timing. And we try to step out of our responsibility. Well, I'm just waiting on God. Well, you're going to be waiting forever, honey. You're going to be dead and still waiting on God. Because guess what? He ain't going to fix your issue with somebody else. He expects you to fix that issue. And we blame shift, and we don't take responsibility, and we put stuff off on Him, and we say stuff because it sounds spiritual, and it sounds flowery, and it sounds really good, but at the end of the day, He's saying, it ain't mine to fix, it's yours to fix. You deal with it. And they will stay in the prison of your unforgiveness until you deal with it, because I'm not touching it. God doesn't administer, listen, God does not administrate our relationships with other people. We do. I'm just believing that God's going to fix these problems between me and my husband. No, that's your job to administrate that, honey. He wants you to take His principles of the kingdom and apply them to your marriage, and you take responsibility for it. I'm still waiting on a miracle. Well, guess what? You're going to be waiting a long time. You be the miracle you need to see in your marriage. You administrate the relationships in your life. He administrates our personal relationship with Him. But from us, if someone else is going to be forgiven, released, accepted, understood, and received, God's not going to administrate that. We have to. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what Jesus said in John chapter 20, verse 23, when He looked at the disciples on Resurrection Sunday night. And He said to them, if you forgive the sins of any, they're forgiven. But if you retain their sins, they're retained. Could He have even been speaking about interrelational issues? Because we understand that only God forgives sins committed against God. But we also carry the message of reconciliation. And we have to be, listen, we've been reconciled to be reconcilers. And we have to understand that we carry that message. So what's the motivation to forgive what happened? What's the motivation to forgive the accusations? What's the motivation to forgive the arguments or the lies or the injustices you've suffered? We have to understand that the grace that we've experienced, that His grace poured out in our lives, is greater than the pain we feel. And we forget that. We forget it. We forget that His grace is greater than our pain. We forget that what He's forgiven us of is far greater than what we need to release someone else from. And that the grace we've received, it's not a suggestion. It's a clear expectation. You got to release. You got to forgive. I will only forgive and give over and release when I remember how much greater than my pain are the dimensions of God's grace towards me. His grace towards me dwarfs the pain that I carry because of others. That's awesome. His grace that I've experienced is greater than the friend who hurt me or failed me. His grace that I've experienced is greater than an unfaithful spouse. His grace is greater than the abuse I experienced as a child. His grace is greater than the rejection you've dealt with. His grace is greater than the person who made you look bad at work. His grace is greater than the one who owes you and refuses to pay you back. So what happened to the unforgiving servant who missed all of this? Just missed it. Verse 34. And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers. Somebody say the torturers. Until he should pay all that was due him. Now what's interesting, the master's first encounter with the servant, his plan was, I'm going to take everything you have, I'm going to split up your family, you're going to lose your freedom, all of you are going into slavery. That's not what he said this time. He did not return him to his previous condition. You see that? He didn't return him to the first penalty. But what he did is he said, I'm handing you over to the torturers. Now, when we think torturers, we think some sadist, don't we? We think that homeboy's getting laid on the rack, or he's going to be getting, waterboarded, 30 times a day. We're thinking, little needles under the fingernails, and we're thinking, but that's not at all the picture here. What it is I'm handing you over to the nagging bill collectors. There's not going to be a moment of your day or night that somebody's not going to be demanding payment. What he's saying is this, is you're not going to lose your freedom, but you are going to lose your peace. You're not going to lose your freedom. I'm not selling you into slavery, but you will lose your peace. You're going to get to go home tonight. You're going to get to kiss your wife goodnight. You're going to get to put your children to bed. You're going to be able to lay your head on a pillow, but you will not be able to find rest because of the debt that you owe me. And I will make sure that there is always a voice in your ear reminding you of that. I'm not rescinding your salvation. I'm just refusing to allow you to live in peace while being unforgiving. It's powerful. It's powerful. How many of us realize and understand that people, I think science has even proven this, that people who don't forgive many times get sick? That people who don't forgive oftentimes get sick. Listen, guys, your body and soul and your personality was not created to bear the burden of unforgiveness. Your body, your soul, and your personality was not created to carry the heavy weight of unforgiveness. You will crack under the weight of a spirit of unforgiveness in your mind, will, emotions, and in your body. Now, I'm going to try to illustrate this morning. Lee's going to come and help me out. I've got just a normal book bag here, and I'm going to try to put this thing on the front to illustrate our hearts, to illustrate our lives. And this is what happens. Come on over, Lee. This is what happens. Here we have, and right now it's empty, guys. This thing's completely empty, okay? But what begins to happen is we go through life and somebody offends us. Somebody at work hurts us. And what do? It's like putting a brick down in our heart, down in our soul. I feel that a little bit, but it's not too bad. I can continue to moderately function this way. Not great. I know I look like a buffoon, but, you know, I could preach the rest of this message, and it might start to get uncomfortable, but I really doubt it. You know, this offense that I'm carrying right here isn't enough to keep me up at night. But then my wife or my husband, my spouse says something or does something. They forget my anniversary. They forget my birthday. They don't give me the attention that I need. They say something offhanded. I get offended, and the next thing I know, put two of them in there because can't nobody hurt you like they can. My load just got a little heavy. I feel like I'm pregnant. Is this what you felt like, baby? And my load just got a little bit heavier. And I can feel it now. Okay? Before I really couldn't feel it. I felt it a little bit, but I could ignore that. I can't ignore this. And then guess what? I was going through the grocery store the other day, and I was going passing the chips aisle, and I looked down the chip aisle, and there stood that person that lied about me. You know, that person that spread all kind of gossip, that accused you, that lied about you, that used you, that just tore your name to pieces. And I saw them, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. And I felt a little bit of redneck want to jump up, and in my mind, I'm no longer thinking about groceries. I'm thinking about getting that tool, that tire tool out the back of my car. And I'm wondering how bad would it dent their head? Y'all with me? Maybe y'all ain't like me. You know, maybe you don't think, I wonder what their face would look like if my fist hit it just right. Would the right, how hard would their neck pop? Maybe y'all don't think that way. Maybe it just hurts your feelings and you start to cry. You know, some of us have to suppress violence. And I'm feeling it. I just went to get some lemon juice. Now it's getting bad, right? And because now I'm carrying all this weight, don't miss this. Now because I'm carrying all this weight and unforgiveness and bitterness, I'm realizing that my sensitivity level's going up. And now stuff that used not to bother me starting to annoy me. Why? Because now I'm offended with all this. If one person does or says the slightest thing that before all of this I would have ignored, it would have had no place. Now the least little thing sets me off. Somebody didn't speak to me at church. Put another one on there. Somebody didn't like my Facebook post. And now all the unforgiveness is just compounding. Now it's really uncomfortable. Now, you know what? People can tell me I look nice. They love me. They're happy to see me. I don't even hear the nice stuff. Why? Because I'm so bogged down with all of this. I can't even receive love. Why? Because I'm walking in so much unforgiveness. I'm just pressing it down in my soul. And my shoulders feel heavy. There's always tension. I could get a massage every day and it would never release the tension in my neck and down my back. I'm popping is it Xanax or something for, I got heartburn. I don't know. I don't use that stuff. Food don't even taste right. I'm in the bathroom 18 times a day. Can't sleep. Cranky. Can't even love my kids. They forget to say yes ma'am or yes sir one time and I'm crawling them like they've robbed a bank. Why? It's not because of that. It's because of this. I can't function like this. But I'm trying to live life like this. Can I go further? I come to church and I hear some teaching. Why is he always picking on me? He's picking on me. Poor little me. He prayed and studied and prepared for a month just to come at me. I don't know if we can zip this thing. Lord, have mercy. And then what do? We try to put it all on lockdown. But the problem is this. We're good. Just like this bag wasn't designed to carry bricks, your heart wasn't designed to carry that bitterness and unforgiveness. And we wonder why we can't thrive at life. We show up at church, we lift our hands when we sing. We give faithfully. Now the people count and receive it, but I don't know if that God does. Because remember last week we learned that he said, don't judge, don't condemn, forgive, then give, and that shall be given. It's one thing for the ushers to receive it, it's another thing for God to receive it. And then I wonder why the law of reciprocity isn't working. God. And I wonder why the law of self-determination isn't working. It's because my heart, it can't work. My back's starting to talk to me right now. I've been here. I think we've all been here. And so what do we have to do? We have to come to the Father and we have to say, take the pain of that offense. Take that hurt that somebody didn't like my Facebook post. Take that hurt from my spouse. Take that disappointment with my child. Take the hurt from the person I wanted to murder at Kroger. Take the hurt from the coworker. Lord, I give it all to you. And I release them because you've been so gracious to me. How can I not be gracious to them? Why? Because that was torture. God. That was torture. How can I not forgive? Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. I feel that. A man once forgiven his debt is once again making payments because of his forgetfulness and his lack of gratitude. Again, his salvation was not renounced, but his peace was refused. The backlash of bitterness. Listen, how many of you guys have ever... Wow, this feels like it's still there. This is gross, but just bear with me. How many of you have ever had a septic tank issue and had stuff back up in your house? Anybody? And you got to call the honey wagon, right? And they come out and they dig it up and then they suck it out. Guys, that's what unforgiveness is like in our souls. It's like a septic backup. Think about your septic system backing up into your house. How nasty that would be. The smell, the potential for disease, how unhealthy, the bacteria, the disgust. When we choose not to forgive, that's exactly what our souls look like. That's what our souls become. A house with a backed up septic system that can't release the junk, that can't release the crap. And we let all the crap back up in us. God's got a better way. You can't thrive that way in life. You can't thrive that way in life. Verse 35, the pronouncement. So my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart not from his mind, not from a religious sense of expectation, but from your heart. He's saying, I'm not looking at lip service. How bad do you want your heart to be clean? How bad do you want your heart to be healed? And from your heart, you've got to release people. If you don't forgive from your heart, he says, and you don't forgive your brother his trespasses, that's going to be your life. Lost joy and a nagging debt. What's Jesus saying in this pronouncement, in this warning? Don't forget to forgive. Don't forget the source of your forgiving. The grace you've received from the Father is your source that empowers you to be able to forgive. Don't forget. Don't forget. You've been forgiven. Now live forgivingly. It's hard though sometimes, isn't it? Because when you're 100% absolutely right, absolutely right, you know what you also are? I've learned this personally. You're 100% absolutely in bondage to your rightness. You might be 100% absolutely right. The injustice may be real. You may have every reason, every legitimate reason to be offended, to be hurt, to be angry. It may take very little explanation. But the reality is this: you're also going to be 100% in bondage to your rightness. And then what that's going to do is that's going to be 100% absolutely doing more damage by the inability to let it go and to release the grace that we've received. You know, Hope and I, could y'all come please? Hope and I, in the last few months, realized that there was just some things in our hearts that we were honestly 100% absolutely right about. But we were 100% absolutely in bondage to our rightness. And that we just had to unload our hearts. That illustration was a visual illustration of what I was living with. Why? Because I chose to live with it. So what she and I had to do is, when we were with our pastors back in September, we sat down with them. We confessed what was going on. I said, you know what? We're right. And they said, yeah, we believe you're right. But I said, however, my rightness and my holding on to my rightness, I can't continue to grieve the Holy Spirit because I'm right. And so what she and I did is we separately, I've never read hers, she's never read mine. We just wrote down on paper all the stuff, all the words, all the lies, all the accusations, all the injustices. And we just sat there with them because, see, what she and I had done is we'd spent months and months and months and months praying. We'd spent months, at times, fasting. We'd spent time after time after time confessing, Lord, I forgive. God, I forgive. I forgive. There wasn't a single person, a single name, or a single situation on my paper that I hadn't fasted and prayed over before. Lord, I don't want to walk with this. That wasn't our first time addressing it. But you know what I realized is that some pain, that some hurt, some rejection, some abuse, some lack of appreciation is so powerful that you need somebody who walks in a greater authority in your life to help you break it. You can't always just break all of it by yourself, because sometimes the effects go so deep. See, if someone had cancer, we would think, hey, call for the elders. We need to get people in here to lay hands on you and pray for you and to break cancer off of you. Listen, sometimes the pain in our lives is so deep, it's like the worst cancerous tumor that you can imagine, and you just can't get free by yourself. So we sat on a porch in Northwest Arkansas with our pastors and said, we've tried, we've sown, we've fasted, we've declared. We can't get free. The residue has got to go. And we said, we need you to help break this off of us. You know what? We've been better. Something happened in our souls that day. I can tell you, we left Arkansas not with a heart full of bricks that we tried to unload. But for some reason, I don't know. I think maybe we just needed a definitive moment that we could always point back to. Guys, forgiveness is foundational and it's fundamental. But listen to me, it's hard. It is hard. Isn't it amazing that something that's expected for members of the family to do is yet so stinking hard sometimes? Listen, guys, I'm not standing up here preaching to you, forgive, like it's some easy thing to do. Sometimes, and it depends on the offense, and it depends on the pain, and it depends on how long it's been there. Sometimes it's just hard. Sometimes when you've lived with something so long, you've learned how to accommodate the dysfunction of it. And everybody else that looks at your life sees it as a dysfunction, but you've become functionally dysfunctional. And we forgive, and it was like, man, I want a pat on the back. I want a prize. I want an attaboy. I want some applause. And God's saying, you just did what you're supposed to do. There's no applause for this because that's just what I expect of members of my family. I am very glad that you chose to approach this from your new nature and not your old nature. And we want the applause. Why? Because the guilt and the condemnation, listen, it's bad enough that the resentment and bitterness is killing us. But then when you know better, then you feel condemned and shame about it at the same time. So now the shame and the condemnation over the bitterness is beating the hell out of you times two. It's compounded bondage. Listen, guys, I've learned unforgiveness magnifies everything negative. If I'm carrying unforgiveness in my life, everything that is negative gets magnified multiple times. It magnifies everything. One thought, one memory can send us overboard into forgetting His grace that's been extended towards us. And He's saying this morning, that's not an option. Don't let that be an option. Don't let that be an option. And you know what I've had to learn in my life? Listen, I wish I could sit here and tell you that since we got back from Northwest Arkansas, I haven't had a single thought. No, I've had thoughts. But you know what I've had to do is I've had to say, thought, I will not give my heart to you. I will not give you my heart. So you may come, but you're going to come and go. You're not going to come and stay. Because it's not the thought that comes and goes that's a problem. It's the thought that comes and we allow it to stay. That becomes a source of bitterness in our lives. And it sends us on a tailspin. It's not an option, guys. Let's stand together this morning.